Hey everybody, it's Monday, October 19th, and we're well into fall. It's Monday, and that means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. I'm Cecilia Supp, one of your co-hosts. I'm also the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Consulting. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. My friend and co-host, Agnes Amos Coleman, who's a senior consultant with Rogue Tulips, can't join us today. On Agnes's behalf, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience, and thank you all for joining us today. And we're really excited because we have two fantastic guests today. Bruce Rosenthal of Bruce Rosenthal Associates, who's also a member of our Rogue Tulips Network, and Chris Gloede with Ricochet. I would like to say hello and welcome to both of you, Bruce and Chris. And Bruce, I'm going to throw it over to you so you can do a quick intro.
Great, thank you. Glad to be here today, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I've worked on corporate sponsorship programs for many years, and obviously with the pandemic, this changes the whole paradigm around sponsorship, since many sponsorships have involved conferences and events. So as organizations look for new models, Chris and I got together a few months ago and developed a new model for sponsorships at virtual conferences.
That's great. Thanks, Bruce. And Chris describes himself as a transformational guide for nonprofit organizations. So welcome, Chris. We're all about transformation here at Rogue Tulips. Would you like to make a quick intro?
Yes, I'm the former Chief Marketing Officer of the American Bar Association, and today I consult to associations, helping them improve their membership and marketing activities through big changes. We call them transformational events. Often that includes changes to your technology, your data and analytics, and your staff skills and processes.
Welcome. Thank you. And that's great because, as I said, we love transformation here at Rogue Tulips. We're all about new ideas and trying different things. So today, as Bruce mentioned, we're here to talk about the paper that was recently released, the new sponsorship model for virtual events. And as we were prepping for this episode, I described Chris and Bruce as the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup of transformation in virtual sponsorships and virtual events. So I'm going to throw it back over to Bruce and let Bruce make some comments about how corporate partner programs can work more effectively with the digital tools that are out there.
Thank you, Cecilia. I mean, what I found, especially, going way back when to March and April, at the beginning of the pandemic, is when many associations began to cancel their conferences, the first reaction of many associations was to either roll over sponsor fees into the following year, or to give sponsors the same types of logo visibility recognition benefits on their virtual platforms as that the companies were getting on their in-person events. And my experience, and this really goes back many years pre-pandemic, is many companies have not been that enthralled with the visibility, logo recognition, shout-out benefits at in-person conferences for years. And when associations began to pull back or to tell companies they could get a refund or roll their sponsorships into next year, some of those companies just left. And I'm concerned they will not come back unless associations can come up with a better value proposition for those sponsors at their virtual conferences.
So Chris, how does what you do feed into what Bruce does? Bruce creates relationships. He gets people to think about working with their partners differently. So how does what you do intersect with that?
Yes, I think that bringing a digital element also brings an analytic element to almost any project. And so a lot of what I contributed to this white paper and to the conversations is around how new digital virtual event platforms collect data and create opportunities for partners to connect to the attendees in new ways. And so it's about using that platform and that data to drive performance, improve the performance of the sponsorship.
Well, so this question is for either one of you, whoever wants to jump in first. What do you think is the most provocative idea in your paper?
Well, I think what we started with was what companies are really looking for around conferences. And this is true for in-person as well as virtual. And it is much more than logo recognition, visibility, and shout outs from the stage. And the 7 areas that Chris and I identified the companies are most interested in is, of course, growing awareness of who their company is, positioning their company as a thought leader. And this is really important because especially a top-level sponsor wants to know how are they differentiated from the dozens of other companies that sell a similar product or service that are part of the association. Companies often want to connect with a segment. So it's great that conferences can attract hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people, but many companies are looking for a particular segment, a type of member, title of individual within that member company. Companies are also looking to differentiate and have a different perception of their company to their competitors. Companies, of course, want to generate sales leads and ultimately sell. And in many cases, companies want to demonstrate corporate responsibility. And this is huge with the pandemic because many companies can come in there and truly help organizations and companies get through the challenges of the pandemic and to deal with issues that members have never had to deal with before.
That's a great overview of the current situation, I think. So, Chris, do you think that we're just actually arriving much sooner than we thought we would to the place we should have been 5 or 10 years ago?
Yes and no. I believe that 5 or 10 years ago, we thought we would be here by now. So I can't say that we've arrived here sooner than we hoped or expected to. I do think the pandemic thrust us through the evolution into virtual events in a way that would have taken us another 5 or 10 years to reach. So it's been a very exciting time and a very chaotic time for so many associations as they've had to do a decade's worth of evolution in 6 months.
So what do you think has been the greatest struggle in communicating change to associations? And I'll throw that to Chris, sorry. When we have two guests, I should do that.
So I feel that the struggle today and over the past year is just the uncertainty of the environment and that has delayed many decisions. And so as our understanding of the pandemic medical elements has evolved, as the travel restrictions have evolved, as local regulations around gatherings have evolved, it's very different. We're trying to make plans on shaky soil. And so helping associations make plans and make decisions in this chaotic environment, to me, has been the biggest challenge, followed really closely with the new skills and techniques that you need to quickly develop to conduct a successful virtual event and to develop successful virtual partnerships.
Well, and I think that what we're seeing is something that, again, I think you're right, Chris, I agree with you. This is where we should have been 10 years ago because we actually were here 10 years ago. Remember the snowpocalypse, and there was supposed to be the tech conference for ASAE, and it got snowed out. Within 36 hours, they put together the unconference, which was a hybrid event. You could stream it online, or if you were there in person already, you could participate there. So I think that we've had a missed opportunity that we're now, because of circumstances, taking advantage of. And Rogue Tulips recently released a research report based on a survey we did about how associations and other nonprofits are reacting to COVID-19. And of course, conferences and dealing with corporate partners was a big part of what we learned. One of the most interesting and exciting things is that what we learned is that people are doing more creative things with their corporate partners. So that's a great question for Bruce. So have you seen some creativity or some innovation? Have you seen people really adapting and realizing, let's build that individualized experience for the corporate partners?
Well, I think the opportunity that our white paper describes are a number of those strategies. And it's interesting, as Chris talks about the digital transformation for associations, companies have been doing this for years. Mm-hmm. Companies have databases and they track who's buying what and who's a repeat buyer and who went to which sales seminars and then came back to buy more. And the same way that we've seen Amazon and other companies tracking data for years. So associations, to effectively engage those companies, need to be part of that same process that companies have been using for years. So when we look at the major things that companies are looking for and the ways those can be offered in the digital environment, so when companies are looking for ways to grow awareness at virtual events, we can now track the exact number of people that attend each virtual seminar, and we can't do that at the in-person events as well. And when companies want to be positioned as thought leaders, they can easily offer a white paper or a research study and have that linked on the virtual platform and not as a handout in the back of the room or buried somewhere on a conference website or an app. And especially connecting with a segment and identifying a particular target for that company. associations now have the ability in merging their member database with their virtual conference database. If a company says, gee, we really want to reach HR directors of your member companies of a certain size in these 5 states who attended these 3 virtual conference sessions, the association can now say, here's a list of those 80 people. And the company would be much more interested in reaching out to those 80 people with more educational content than the full list of 800 or 8,000 people who attended the conference.
That's an excellent point. And it also brought up, which I think is a question for Chris, which you're likely not expecting. I unfortunately have a Netflix account, so I watch a lot of documentaries. So I've watched The Great Hack and I've watched The Social Dilemma. So building on what Bruce said, it's a thin line to walk on. Collecting all this data about people, analyzing people. I believe that you do need to know what your members and your stakeholders want. But Chris, what are some of the ethical pitfalls of doing things like this? And what advice might you have? Because we do want to merge this information in order to deliver a fuller experience for people.
Right. So I also enjoyed this social dilemma. And I think that one of the themes of that particular documentary is around transparency and understanding on, in their case, the consumer part, in the case of associations, usually our members part. And so as associations are developing and using data in new ways, it's important that they are clear, transparent, and in plain language, explaining to their members how their information will be used. So for example, many associations and many conferences in the past have not shared email addresses for attendees with their exhibitors or sponsors. But in recent months and years, I'm seeing more often that there's an opportunity for the consumers to, or the attendees to opt out of sharing that information. So it's explained to them in the registration process that in fact, we're going to share your data with vendors or with partners that we think are of value to you. And if you don't like that, please uncheck this box. So again, transparency is, I think, the key to maintaining that trusted relationship with your constituents, whether they're members, attendees, or sponsors.
Well, and I think this approach is actually to the great benefit of members. And I always advocate that sponsorship programs focus on the association's mission first and members second, and then the goals of the company. But in the example I mentioned earlier of identifying an audience that a company is interested in, HR directors, companies of a certain size, certain region of the country, and who attended 2 sessions that relate to the product or service that company offers, those 80 members have already self-selected. They are interested in more information. And I think members would be much more interested in receiving that information than the full list of 800 or 8,000 folks that often get information from all companies who exhibit. So I think we often hear that members are not pleased with the amount of information to get from all exhibitors or all sponsors. To have targeted information is really a favor to members and a great benefit to members.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Bruce. I agree, because I remember, in the past going like ASAE conferences and just getting so much mail, like so many postcards or so many emails, and they're not necessarily specific to me. So I do agree with that wholeheartedly. So what are, we just have a few minutes left, so I want to bring it back to the paper. So what led you to write this paper? Was it just a pandemic, or was it something you might have done pre-pandemic? I mean, what's the backstory?
I'm happy to tackle that, Bruce. So Bruce and I both independently participate in many online forums, and we're seeing discussions about how sponsorship should evolve in what's clearly becoming a virtual event season. I think that the pandemic affected us in the topic, but it also affected our partnership. So while Bruce and I maybe would have worked independently on this type of research in the past, as we've become more connected and networked through Zoom, and the barriers of distance and networking has changed, we also came to know each other through these forums and gatherings and said, why don't we try and tackle this one together? So the pandemic shaped both the topic and then our approach. And I think that the thinking in the paper is that much stronger because we come at it from 2 different perspectives. Certainly the paper is innovative. It breaks some new ground. It challenges assumptions and ways of doing business. And I think it charts a nice path forward for associations that need a way to adapt and grow their sponsorship dollars.
Right. And I think the paper is more relevant now than it was when we wrote it 2 months ago, because what we've seen is where 2 months ago associations were thinking they could go back to in-person first quarter, second quarter next year. I think we're now looking at the reality that there'll be a heavy virtual component, or maybe even exclusively virtual component, through a good part of next year. So this is not just a virtual conference sponsorship model to get us through the next few months. This is through the next year and possibly beyond. And one of the components or one of the sections that we included in the white paper is a sample prospectus with over 25 specific ideas of things that associations can offer, and they can use that sample prospectus as something that they can use to develop their own prospectus for their upcoming virtual events, for their sponsorships.
And that's a great plus, I think, of this paper. I've read it, of course. I thought it was really well done. I like it. So if you don't have a copy yet, get one. Unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time for this week. But Chris, what's your closing thought that you'd like our audience to take away on this topic? And how can they get in touch with you?
I think it's important that whatever the right solution is for you, an association should pull together multiple disciplines as they think through the developing sponsorship offerings and include potential sponsors in that discussion. And the best way to get in touch with me is through my website, which is www.ricochetadvice.com.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And then Bruce, what's your closing thought? How can people get in touch with you? And what's the best way to get a copy of the paper?
Sure. Well, all sponsorship programs are predicated on increasing revenue for the association and value for members. So there is, and whether it's a year-long sponsorship program, an event sponsorship program, I often hear from associations that come out of my trainings and workshops that they realize they're leaving money on the table. So this is a huge opportunity for increased revenue and member growth. I can be reached, my website is brucerosenthal.associates. And I'm also co-convener of the Partnership Professionals Network, which is an organization that brings together sponsorship professionals for education, training, and networking. And that website is partnershipprofessionals.network. And the white paper is available through both Chris's website and my website.
That's great. So if you don't have your copy, like I said, go get one, download it, read it. It's very applicable and it's very on point for what we're doing right now. Unfortunately, we have to go rogue for now, but I want to thank our guests, Chris Gloede of Ricochet and Bruce Rosenthal of Bruce Rosenthal Associates for joining us today to talk about this great paper. And if you want to learn more about Rogue Tulips, you can check us out at roguetulips.com and check out our new resources page where we share tools and information for all nonprofits. We're also big supporters of the 501c League, which is a membership organization for everyone in the nonprofit community and the people who love them. You can check out the league at the 501cleague.net. They offer courses. If you're still chasing that ethics requirement, they have an ethics course that fulfills the CAE renewal requirement. So thanks again to our guest, and thank you to our audience. We couldn't do it without you, and we will see you next time. Bye.